dum 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 dum
Space Between.
Why, hello. This is the Space Between podcast where we talk about the space between life and art, passion and business, what's happening now, and what's happening next. I'm Pat Shand, and today I'm alone. Today I'm sitting on the throne dolo because, and you see, I already have my cat Hoyt. He's playing with some blinds in the background. Okay, it's kind of hard to say, and it kind of sounds like a rap lyric. Blinds in the background. I keep my mind on the sack ground. Shit doesn't make sense, but hey. So my point is, my cat Hoyt, he just let out a meow too. He's in the background. And you know what? We don't have a studio. We just do this in our home. So this, you can call this the background noise podcast. You can call this the Foley podcast. We don't have any noise canceling action. We're just doing this. We're just doing this on the cheap. But yeah, it's another commentary episode. I've been doing these writer audio commentaries on some of the works that we publish. And I know that some of you are just fans of the podcast. And when these episodes come along, you might have to hit that dislike because you haven't read the book yet. But what I would say is, one, if you haven't read the book yet, you can give it a chance. We're on Amazon. All of our releases are on Amazon, on Comixology. If you want to, if you're ever curious about what we do, you can get our work there because we aren't just a YouTube channel. We aren't just a podcast. We are a graphic novel publisher. And, some of you guys want more of this kind of stuff. You listen to our podcasts and you wonder oftentimes what we're talking about. Because it's not comics usually. We usually just talk about what's going on in our lives, in the world. We talk about some current events. And sometimes we're honest with you guys. We just, we bear our emotions to you. Like, I gotta say, I'm gonna bear an emotion to you right now. I feel the acidic bubbling of rage right now in my solar plex, right? Because I see my cat Hoyt, who I love very much. He's my son. He's my best friend in the world. But he is going around and he's looking for things to destroy. And as I say this, he spotted my other cat, Chi-Chi. She's a young little calico, and she just hopped off her area, and he's scheming on that rear end, I'll say, okay? I'm trying not to curse in the first 10 minutes of these episodes so we can have a chance at monetization, hit that green dollar instead of that yellow warning sign on YouTube. But all right, so today I'm going to be doing a commentary on my creator-owned comic book series, and now it's out in graphic novel form. It's a horror comic called Little Girl. And here's the thing. This is the first time I'm going to be doing a commentary on my work through this podcast that isn't a Space Between release. This was a book that I did with the comic book publisher Devil's Due Comics. You might know them from Mercy Sparks, which a red woman is at the center of that series. She's a deviling, and she's on her adventures in that series. And I actually that's their flagship title. And I recently joined the writer Josh Blaylock of that series as co-writer. Going to be wrapping up that current arc of that book right now, and then we're on to the next. And they have put out such works as the AOC comic. They did a Barack Obama parody comic. They like that political humor sometimes. And yeah, I'm a big fan of Josh and what they do at Devil's Due, and have been for a while. So I guess I'll get into a little bit before I do the breakdown of this comic and what it's about. I'll just give some of you early listeners, those who are only going to skim the first 10 minutes, some of you might want to know how to get a comic book published. And the way that it happens every time for me, it's very unconventional. There's no real set way to do it. There's no set way that I've done it. But for this one specifically, I had pitched it to Vertigo, which is the now defunct. They're for sure coming back though. I can't imagine a world where Vertigo is long gone. The now defunct indie comics branch of DC Comics, where they would have. Well, I shouldn't say indie because DC is about as corporate as it gets, but they had this branch where creators could do their creator-owned work there, Vertigo, and I pitched there, and I didn't get in with that one, and I pitched at various few places around, and there were no bites on this comic Little Girl that I co-created with artist Olivia Pelaez. So I decided, I'm not even sure what went into it. I just did that reckless social media post. I didn't. I'm sorry to say I didn't consult Olivia on this. I just took it into my own hands. I don't know what came over me, but one day I just posted the first 7 pages, which was our full pitch of the comic, on Facebook and Twitter. And it worked. I took that risk with that one, and it paid off. It's like you go to the casino and you pull that cranker. It could end up in a bad situation for you. You could end up on a bad deal with a man like Tony Soprano. But instead, personally, I pulled that crank, and I ended up with 2 offers on the table. I got an offer from a publisher that is now defunct, who is for sure not coming back. Unfortunately, this publisher owes me in the range of $2,000, and it kind of makes me feel like 50 Cent. It makes me feel like I want to text the people involved and say that they have until Monday to get me my compensation, right? But Devil's Due, right? Devil's Due was the other offer. They offered me a good deal, and I was a fan, as I said, of what Josh does with his company, and I consulted with Olivia, and together we decided to go with Devil's Due. And the book began to come out last year. It wrapped this year, and now, after a Kickstarter, we have a trade paperback. And because, hey, speaking of Foley, my other cat, Neil, because I live in the wild, clearly, he is chewing on a box of my other books. And I gotta say, I'm not entirely thrilled with the cat's behavior during this episode of the podcast. This, I might say, is some of the worst behavior that they've exhibited while recording. So I'm gonna throw a little comforter over the area that Neil's chewing, because he doesn't like to assault soft things. He only likes that hard hit. So, Little Girl. It's a series about we market it as it's a ghost story told from the ghost point of view, and that's true, and it's not. We start with a bit of a fake out. We have we follow for the first 2 issues. Each issue starts with a character that we follow for a little bit, and it makes it seem as if they're going to become the hero of this story, and then the ghost gets involved for some ghost hijinks. And through these issues, the first 2, we slowly begin to get a bit of the ghost's story, the ghost's name being Abby May. And then by issue 3, the story becomes her own, and she really leads the story. So what I'm going to do here, for those who haven't listened to our previous commentaries, we've done Prison Witch, Afterglow, and Destiny New York. Now, with this one, I'm going to break it down chapter by chapter. I'm not going to do every page, so I would very much say that this isn't one of those read along with the writer type things. It's not an audio book. I'm going to talk to you guys assuming that you've already read the book. So please be aware, full spoilers are within. If there's a thing that I did not touch on that you were hoping I would, please feel free, hit me up and ask me a question. I am always free to give you an honest answer. So, come on. I wrote the the comic book Charmed, based on the TV show. I wrote Charmed season 10 for 2 years. And during that whole time, my inboxes on all social media forums were full of, let me put this in the best way possible, well-meaning questions about various aspects of what I was doing, okay? So, little girl, let's just go through the credits. It's written by myself. It's drawn by Olivia Pelaez, who also painted physical, actual paintings were the covers. She even sold these through the Kickstarter. You know, I wish I could have got my own because they're beautiful pieces of artwork. But so she drew the book and she painted the covers. And we're both the co-creators. The colors are by Fran Gamboa with JC Ruiz. It's a team that I've worked with before. Very much enjoy them. And lettered and designed by Jim Campbell, who is the gentleman that I work with on actually all these books. You know, he is the letterer and designer for all of my work that I am in control of. You know, I do some other projects where I'm freelancing, and they throw some other definitely competent folks on board, putting those words in balloons and just making sure everything looks tight and right and beautiful, right? But Jim, to me, no one does it like Jim. Jim should be able to go to the Eisners and just scoop up the best letter award every year. I said reward, but I meant award. But I'm not going to go back and change it. I'm just going to keep it loose, you know? So here we go. Chapter 1 is called Shout Not. This introduces, first, we have a scene that has no context. You know, you have this penguin doll that is on the road, and then we kind of follow the penguin, and through this doll, we get, we use that as the sort of, you know, when you order an Uber, right? And the Uber's coming to you, and you see it coming to you, and it's following that little pinpoint that you dropped on the map. The penguin for this book is that pinpoint. We follow it until we contextualize it as the device through which the ghost, Abby, comes into this world. So, we have these two characters that we start with. And, you know, I wrote these, and I wrote the entire book, actually, out of fear. These were all things that I was scared of, down to concepts as large as death in general, all the way up to, I should say all the way down to the concept of traveling so much for creativity and for my career that I don't do my relationship service. We have these characters, Sarah and Damon, right? Sarah has a busy job, and Damon is away. You know, he's traveling, he's doing his writing, he's trying to get a Hollywood gig. And yeah, you know, he represents what I feared could happen to me in a relationship. Not my current relationship, I'll say. You know, I've always felt, since Amy, who is the co-host of this podcast, is also a creative, she gets this, and she gets this journey a lot more than previous ventures, I'll say, ventures. Yeah, she really gets this, and she often comes with me, but this was just a fear that had been sort of a seed in my chest for a while, that, you know, that when you leave often and go on these trips, life pulls you apart and turns you into different people. So we have this, Sarah begins to, at home alone, be haunted by the ghost that is attached to this penguin, and we see a lot into the ghost that is. We see these flashbacks that manifest as dreams that Sarah is having, and I wanted that there for a few reasons. Later, the goal is to just drop these scenes here that if you go back and read it, after you know what happened to Abby, you have a better understanding of why all those scenes are there. but as is, they're also meant to evoke terror. They're just quick flashes of this hyper religious father being violent and cruel to this girl who through these flashbacks you're meant to believe that she drowned because of his actions, but later on we do subvert that. So yeah, Sarah goes through this horrible night and day where she is haunted by this ghost, but because she suspects Damon's brother Al of messing around with her because of her own guilt. She has been cheating on Damon, who, unbeknownst to her, is cheating on her as well. So she believes that his brother Al has uncovered her activity and is somehow in the house, or has let something into the house to torment her. But the truth is, she is being haunted, and the manner of the haunting. I'll be honest, I've been scared of ghosts ever since I was a kid, and that has not changed in my adulthood. I have this fear of death, and it's embodied by that. It's I feel that our fear, and I say our, I do mean my own, but just because I don't feel alone in this, I feel that there is some shared psychic trauma over this stuff. To me, ghosts and ghost stories they have potential to be the most terrifying stories because they have two elements. People always say, I always hear some people say that they aren't scared of supernatural stories. They aren't scared of monsters and that kind of thing because a story about a horror that could actually happen, like a killer, is much scarier. To me, a ghost story kind of blends both. You have that element of the unknown, the unnatural, with the idea that this used to be a person. And that is terrifying to me because I can't say for sure that ghosts don't exist. I've never had a one-on-one experience. Some people that I know suggest that they have. In fact, in the back of this book, you'll see I had conversations with creators, my fellow comics brethren, about their experiences with supernatural encounters. And who's to say, who's to say maybe some of these individuals or maybe that wacky coworker, that has had, say they woke up one night and I actually had a coworker tell me this. She saw a pair of disembodied hands floating over her. And all I could think of is that one, that Goosebumps number 13, I don't remember the title, but I remember there's this pair of disembodied hands playing piano, and in the TV adaptation, it was hitting that Moonlight Sonata, yo. So she had those hands, those disembodied fingers playing that Moonlight over her, So you might have a wacky coworker that has that kind of encounter. I have a friend of mine who says that he saw a young man in colonial garb disappear right in front of his face. And who's to say, that could be true. It could be a trick of vision, it could be your mind playing tricks on you. It could be, there's many things that it could be, but I can't for sure say that I don't believe, because the truth is that sometimes at night, in the dark, especially depending on where I am, I feel somewhat safe in my current home. It's this new building, it's that new brick and mortar here. It's not haunted by years and years of trauma and events, right? But get you one of those fucking old ones. Get you a house that has maybe 50 to 100 years of human activity. So something's bound to get caught up in there psychically, right? That's just that's my fear. That's what I would think. I would be in bed sometimes. I remember my grandma. She had dementia, and she moved out of her home and she moved back in with myself, my father, and mother. And as she slowly died, she was on hospice in our home. I remember she would walk from her bedroom to the door that led to the patio. And the patio was a place where I'm not sure if you have any of these rooms in your house, but where so you have a bunch of friends over. You have 14 guys and gals over. The room starts to wind down. All of a sudden, it's 5 people there, and then 3, and then it's just you and a buddy, and that buddy checks out. They got to go home, and all of a sudden you're in the room alone cleaning up some plates and cups, right? And when this would happen to me in the patio, all of a sudden I would have become, what's his name? I would become Usain Bolt. I would flee. I would gather up my cups, and all of a sudden I'd be struck with this potent and terrible what if. And I would flee the room. And that same room, the patio, my grandma would, in her last days, she would go to that door, right? And she would say, she hears voices out there. And that stuck with me for sure. I paired that with that feeling of dread, that dreadful what if that I had coming out of that room. So I don't know if I would consider that proof to me. I don't know that anything could be proof, because it's the unknown for a reason. Things that we can never know because we don't know what happens after we die. And that idea, the lack of knowledge, the lack of certainty, we know if we get in the car and make a right, generally, in case you're very confused, you know where you're going to end up, right? Not all of us are going out of our cars and making a right, though. Some of us are going to be making those lefts, but every single person, every one of us that's born, we get that singular privilege of death. We all get that. All of us. That's the one thing that we all have in common. We become deceased, right? And if we knew about that, if we had any idea for sure, and there are those who are religious who have faith, right? To them, they're faithfully sure. But none of us can be scientifically absolutely sure. And that fear is what inspired this book. And to get back to why I started talking about this, I personally am scared of ghosts. I have not been able to shake the fear, and much of writing this book was about that. Was about empathizing with this object of my fear, which is personified by this little girl ghost. Because the idea of a kid, a dead child, to me is the scariest thing in the world. So I wrote Sarah's haunting, all those scenes where Abby crawls under her sheet, where Abby's eyes glow just a little bit in the dark, where Abby emerges from water, where she first makes herself known by these psychic dreams that disturb Sarah in a way that she can't quite place. And it continues on to chapter 2. But I'll get into that momentarily as I wrap up chapter 1. But my reasoning there was I wanted to create the haunting that I feared. I wanted to sit down and think, I've been scared for so many years. What is the worst way that this could manifest? And that's also why I let Sarah get away for a while. Because when she escapes the haunting for a bit and then ultimately meets her fate later on, in a scene where no one else besides her, no one besides she who holds that toy, that toy penguin, right? That little aquatic beast, that little plush pengy, no one can really know what happened there. And that is the scariest thing in the world to me. And I wrote that with the intention to really dive into my own fear and just swim around in it a little bit and feel those murky waters and just ask myself why. Why has this idea of death personified terrified me for so many years? And I wanted to also put it out there to see if anyone else feels this way, because, horror is such a beloved genre for a reason. I mean, there are fans of every genre. You got those noir fans, right? You got those fantasy fans mapping out those D&D adventures, okay? But in my experience, there's no one as passionate for genre besides horror fans. Horror fans feel a certain amount of home in their genre, and it's actually part of their identity. So yeah, the chapter ends though. We follow Abby away from the definitely not the protagonist of the book, even though I thought I made you think that. Okay, see, I tricked you. There's this line. I'm not going to say where it's from, but it's I'm not going to say what the context is, but it's this orange is the new black scene. There's this amazing new character, and just the line, that was a trick. I tricked you. That, if that isn't destined for gifdom, I don't know what is. But back to the book, right? The chapter finishes with Abby, the ghost. We follow her to this other home. And in this home, she approaches a dog, and she calls him by name, right? And when, instead of recognizing her, he begins to growl and bark viciously as if she's a threat. And then Abby cries. And that was my first step in sort of reckoning with that fear and humanizing that fear, and making it clear that this journey isn't just our journey as readers being haunted, because so much horror does that. And I do love that. I love going on a journey where, we're with the cast as they're tormented by this force. But in this, my intention was to make it clear that we aren't just being haunted with Abby. We're going on Abby's journey with her. And that leads us to chapter 2, which brings the stuffed penguin doll and Abby to a church. And excuse me, I have a little bit of burp in my esophagus right now. So the church, we meet Samuel, Pastor Samuel McKellen. He is very much the opposite of Sarah and Damon. While Sarah refuses to believe that this haunting could be anything but a human's actions, Samuel is ready to embrace the supernatural. He sees he's desperate to help, and this issue actually is perhaps I think it's one of my favorite single issues that I've ever written, because I wanted to create a character that is so the opposite of myself, who I can also deeply empathize with. We're in a time where I don't think that many readers, especially readers of horror, and especially young readers, relate to church figures. So my challenge to myself was to create this empathetic figure, and in fact have him as the moral reverse, the mirror reflection of Abby's father, Gregor, who uses religion for violence as a weapon, as a tool to empower himself and to hurt others. With Samuel, my goal was to create someone who is so human that he's bad at what he does, but he still tries to help, and that in that there is a heroism. And honestly, writing this issue, it made me cry a lot. I empathize with the idea of loneliness and self-destruction. And Samuel is a character who knows that he has self-destructed his life and is unable to undo that damage and is unable to stop his life from becoming more damaged by what he does. And when he realizes that the haunting going on in his life isn't some sort of a devil apparition, but is actually the spirit of a girl who needs help, Samuel reaches out to her, and he heroically tries to help her. He tries to do what he can't do for himself or someone else, and that ends up to be his demise. But I personally, of all the journeys in here, Abby's means the most to me, but right after her is Samuel. Samuel's a character that I hope you as readers connect with, despite how different you likely are. You know, I'm not sure how many drunken reverends are in our readership, but Samuel is a character who definitely has meant a lot to me. I mean, as someone who grew up in church, you know, I was born Catholic. I converted to Presbyterianism in my late teens, and I haven't been to church in quite a long time, but that it's always been part of my life, where I've seen both the power of cruelty empowered by church and religion, and the depth of empathy that can come from it as well. So chapter 3 follows the penguin to a new home, which I had just written this sad, you know, kind of I mean, personally to me, moving chapter. And now I wanted to have a bit of fun before I got into the climax and then fallout of Abby's personal journey. I was inspired by my wife, Amy, who you know as the co-host of this podcast, with this chapter, because Amy is a big fan of true crime. And I thought it would be so fun to have a character who knew about Abby's case, so we could learn a bit more about Abby's life as a human through a lighter means than these trippy, violent flashbacks. And you know, these characters were just a blast to write. And in fact, there's nothing set in stone, but I would love to one day do a spin-off of these characters who have, you know, they have their own little crime. We have it here as it's a YouTube series, but I also imagine them having a podcast. You know, they're fans of the podcast My Favorite Murder, which is also Amy's favorite podcast. But their venture is called Psycho Watch. And I would love to one day, you know, continue their story by creating a series called Psycho Watch that follows them. But we do use them as a means to get Abby from the donation box at the church back to the home where she was born and raised for a while. And here is where, you know, we meet Abby's birth parents, and we see the depths of her father Gregor's evil. You know, he has this very cult-like church that he congregates with in his basement, and that's where Abby attacks. Abby has a spree of violence there, and you know, there's not much more that I could say about the church aspect that isn't said in the book. You know, with these commentaries, there's a lot that I do want to leave to the reader, but I will say that this is not a condemnation of church. That this is a condemnation of abuse of power, both abuse of his power as her father and abuse of power as a religious figure. You know, and both Samuel and Gregor actually do have aspects of that where they are these church figures who aren't acting in the manner, in a godly manner, right? But obviously Gregor to a much different and larger extent. But notably here, this is one thing that I do want to speak about and clarify. First, also, just some beautiful coloring by Fran and some beautiful work by Olivia. It's hard to make extreme violence beautiful, but they do it in such an artful way. It is a vicious attack by a ghost on a congregation of humans, but through it, they find moments of terrifying beauty. And it actually ends with Abby's penguin has been thrown by her mother, who understands what's going on in the end. Before Abby's mother, Judith, dies, she throws the penguin into this blaze that Abby's attack has caused. And as the house burns down, so does the penguin that Abby is conjured forth from. But this is one thing that, I often feel talked down to in comics. As a reader, I feel as if comics, unlike the television that I enjoy and the movies that I love and the books that I find myself engrossed by, comics more often than those media, I feel over-explains. I think that because it's an art form that it's a couple of things. It's a collaboration between a writer and artist, and I know that some writers, if an artist hasn't drawn an idea as clearly as the writer intended, the writer might overwrite to make sure that the audience understands. Or the truth is that some writers they are aware of the fact that people read these issues month to month, and they'll remind the reader of almost the entire story of last month in this new issue. But I personally don't like that. I like a story that feels like it's the natural way to tell the story. And I do want to explain a bit of this one aspect that I let, I pulled back and I let it be told largely by the art. But chapter 4 reveals the reason why Abby was able to part from the penguin in chapter 1, right? In that first issue, I established that she's tied to the penguin, but one thing that surprised me that no one really asked was Abby parts from the penguin and goes to an entirely different state in that issue. She's not with the penguin that we've seen when she goes to visit the house where the dog barked at her. And here we find out that Abby actually, she was adopted by this couple, Seth and Emma. And in this chapter, we find that there is a second penguin, that Seth gave her one of these dolls and kept one for himself during their trial, in fear that Gregor, who was trying to get her back into his custody after her removal from his home and later adoption by Seth and Emma, Seth gave her this penguin in fear that she'd be taken from him, and just to make sure that she knew that they would always be together. So that is explained here through through this artwork and through a little bit of flashbacks later on. But that part, just bridging the gap there to give Abby a way to come back and to have her final attack and final catharsis at this house where she essentially was reborn into a new life, even though that was later robbed of her. The hardest part to write, though, was the song. I wrote this song that Seth sings to her that plays out over the issue. And, I'm not a poet by any means, and it was probably the hardest part of this whole book to write, even though the wording is very spare. So I hope that you guys like it. I hope that it works for you. It was definitely I can write scenes and dialogue all day, but writing a story, who am I, Genuine? Who am I, Bad Baby, right? Just throwing out the most outlandish names. All right, so I'm not sure if you guys can hear the background of that page flipping, but I'm just going through this scene because this reveals one thing. There was one I mentioned earlier that the goal, besides showing her past of Abby's flashbacks, was to make the reader believe that Abby died at the hands of Gregor, that she was drowned. But this chapter reveals the truth to be that she died in a car crash with Seth, that he survived, and she was killed. And the idea there was for Abby to sort of, in this book, right? She is this animalistic force of vengeance, and that is one of the scariest aspects of haunting stories to me, is that this thing that was once human loses its ability to focus its vengeance and to not harm everything in its path, right? So many of these ghosts in these stories, they've been wronged, and they have there's a desire to set that wrong right. And here, the idea was that Abby has been wronged, but her the aim of her vengeance has a wide circumference. And in this, Abby is unable to separate the role that Gregor played earlier from seeing, say, Samuel in his pastor garb. She acts out in that way. She is unable to see this couple without acting out violently. She almost kills this child in chapter 3, but is brought away when the penguin is tugged outside. And then she actually does get what she wants, and she has vengeance on her family. But then she's brought into the home again of Seth and Emma, where she does attack them at first. She is unable to sort her memories in a logical order. So she lashes out, and she sees them as the perpetrators of her pain. And when Seth begins to sing to her, is how she sort of it's almost like a mystery. Abby goes on this quest to sort of piece together what happened to her, and when she actually does interact with Seth, who embraces her even as she's killing him, she's able to remember what actually happened and who Seth is and who Emma is, and how even as tragic as their story ended up to be with her, that they were a positive force in her life, that they tried to save her. And that transforms Abby. She loses the burn marks, she loses her skeletal nature, and she leaves behind that vengeance, and she, as a transformed and spirit still, she still is a ghost, but she leaves with all the undead features having fallen away from her, and she leaves, and now Buzz, the dog who in the first chapter barked at her and was vicious toward her, Buzz chases her out and is struck by a car. And I'll say this is I don't really write scenes where animals get hurt. I have in the past. There's always context to those kind of things when I choose to do them. This isn't one that I like to do, but it just felt like the right ending to me to have. When Buzz is struck, his spirit comes out, and he sees who Abby is, and he embraces her. And in that sort of a connection to her past, she is able to finally let go and finally pass on. And it's the echo of that first scene, the final scene in issue 1, where Abby sees Buzz, who now thinks that she's a monster, and she cries. And honestly, as I talk about it, I kind of want to cry too, because I do feel that animals see more than we do. And the idea was for Buzz to see that something is off in Abby and something is wrong, and this isn't the true her. So for him to now see her as she is and as she was in the moment that she has left all of her hatred behind and can now pass on. I think that all I can say is that I'm happy with the ending. I hope that you, as the reader, are too. I don't love scenes where you see an animal get hurt, but I wouldn't even call this that. Even though that happens, that isn't to me the heart of the scene. The heart of the scene is about Abby being seen as who she is, and that giving her that final moment of catharsis and the ability to just leave it all behind. I guess that's the full story. There's so much more that goes into it that I haven't gotten into just because, I don't want to keep you guys here for too long. I just want to give you that, I want to give you just something that you could press play on and just kind of revisit what we've done. And I hope that you enjoy this conversation. And what I will say is that working on this as a writer was one of the most rewarding experiences of my career so far for many reasons, but one of the main ones is what Olivia did here. She not only did she, of course, design every character, but she put so much of her heart into it all. This story is also quite personal to her. It's very, it's something that she cares a lot about, and you can see that, and even more than that, I believe that you can feel that in the artwork. And it sounds corny, but I'll always cherish having worked on this book because, it did what I set out to do. And that's always, with creator-owned work, I never want to compete with anybody. I don't see myself as having competition. I see my competition, my competition isn't a person or a different creator. My competition, I feel, is me competing with my goals, right? In creating, I'm comparing what I'm doing to my initial idea, what I set out to do. And with this, what I set out to do is to dive into my own personal fears, what scares me most, which is obviously ghosts, right? but also just the idea of death, the idea of hatred, the idea of harboring this animosity within you, as well as questions that I had about religion and God and power. And when I look back on what we've done with Olivia and with Fran and JC and Jim and with Devils Do, to me, we've created something that does that. We've created a piece of art that I consider beautiful, that gives me a way to look at my fears and to go through them again and to, at the end, feel levity, to feel catharsis. And I hope that you as readers can feel the same. I hope that anyone who has been terrified by the idea of seeing something unknown moving in the shadows at night, I hope that you can read this and feel a sense of empathy, or even feel not alone in your fear, because you're not. I think that we as humans, as different as people want us to feel, as much as social media seems to pull us apart, I think that we are, as people, as human beings, I think that we're more alike in our hopes and dreams and fears than we are different. And I hope that people find something of themselves in this book. And I just want to thank those who did support the Kickstarter, of course. We have a big list in the back. I want to thank those who listen to this podcast, when it's a commentary episode or when it's just me and Amy talking, when it's a guest situation. We had two beautiful guests last week. We had Dennis A. Allen, we had Tanya Everett, and they gave an amazing conversation. And I do want to thank everyone who tunes into what we have to say, because just sitting back and having this platform to do what we want to do. This week I was like, all right, I'm going to do this commentary. Next week, who knows? We could do a whole episode talking about Pokemon Go. I could have someone that I want to have on this podcast is Devin Lake. He's this local comedian and musician. I would love to have Devin on here breaking down some of that action. And yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone who rocks with us no matter what we do. And I'll just call attention to this. Right now, I'll end by saying we have a current Kickstarter. If you listen to this before the 23rd of this month, you should be able to get in. We have 52 hours left to go as of recording this. By the time it comes out, we're going to have fewer hours. The Kickstarter is for Destiny New York. It's our flagship series, A Space Between. It's a book about a world where magic is a real and normal part of everyday life. And in this world, we follow a cast of characters who all have their own journeys. The main character is Logan, who had a prophecy made about her when she was young. She completes her destiny when she's 13, just a little teenager, right? She's told the greatest thing she'll ever do at the age of 13 is done. So it's now in the story, she's in her 30s and she's trying to figure out how to have a meaningful life when she's told that she's already done the best thing she'll ever do. It follows her girlfriend, Lilith, who is the last surviving daughter of a mystical crime family. But this short stories volume, it has stories about them. It has stories about their friends. It is the perfect introduction to this book if you haven't read volumes 1, 2, and 3 before. So please hop onto that. The links will be in the comments down below. And all I have to say is thank you so much for those who have supported again, and thank you for listening. And you know what? Soon, we're going to have another episode with just me and Amy talking. We've had these guests. We've had the commentaries. It's time to get back to just some conversation with me, my beautiful wife, and some cats for sure fucking around in the background. Thank you for listening.
Space between.